Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Maria Sharpe. Maria is the founder of My Table Floral Design, a studio florist offering fresh seasonal flowers hand-delivered to your door. What's unique about Maria is how she focuses on making the most out of the seasons, combining natural palettes, textures, and scents to create bespoke floral designs inspired by the great outdoors. And be sure to listen to the end, where Maria shares with us some helpful tips for picking a florist to work with when planning your wedding. So whether you're interested in knowing more about the world of flowers, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Maria Sharpe, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Maria, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, I, for one, love giving flowers. I love giving flowers to my wife. I love giving flowers to my clients because I think they make for just really lovely gifts. But of course, you get to live on the other side of this coin, being a florist yourself. So I'm sure that myself and our listeners can learn a lot from your expertise in this area. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So, Maria, where did you grow up?
Firstly, thanks so much for asking me to take part today. I grew up very locally in Molesey, close to Hampton Court, and lived in this area till my early 20s. And then I moved to Clapham. I was working in London at the time. I had quite a long career previously to my current one, working in London. And so I moved to Clapham and lived there for a couple of years with friends. And then my husband and I bought our first property in Earlsfield. And we were there for about 7 or 8 years, up until we had our first child, our first son. And then I gravitated back to the area because my parents are still here and my sister had also kind of moved back locally. So it just, it was a natural move back to what is a really lovely area to bring up children, I think, and to be
Absolutely.
in. So.
Yeah, you effectively gravitating back home, as it were.
Yeah.
And Maria, what did you study after secondary school?
So I studied health and social care and psychology, and that was in Kingston. And I had a place at Roehampton University, and I was going to go on and study psychology further. But I took a year out and I started working in London, and I didn't go back then to university. Basically, I've always been a worker as such, and far more the creative than the academic. So I fell in love with London and working in London, and at the time I was working for a big recruitment consultancy just off Piccadilly Circus. But I decided through the various jobs that we were recruiting for that I really wanted to work in marketing. And so I went for it, and I did, and I ended up working for various companies in marketing roles for 15 years.
That's fantastic. And Maria, one of the sort of nicest bits of feedback that I get on the show, particularly from our younger listeners, is the fact that obviously they don't know just how varied different people's career paths are. And by just asking that simple question here on the show now to 75 plus guests, everyone has a slightly different route that they took to eventually find the thing that they've become passionate about, or that they were passionate about from the beginning, but maybe didn't get a chance to do at the beginning. And for me, it's always fascinating to hear the different paths one can take to effectively then find that thing that they get to do as a career and as a passion job, or as a profession. And listening to your career journey there in particular is interesting, because it seems like you almost recruited yourself into marketing at some point, because you obviously took an interest on selling this job to others.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, as you say, it's kind of, I think people, if they're lucky, find their way back to perhaps initial passions. And my first job, weekend job, was actually in a florist.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, when I was quite young, I think 15, 16, I got a Saturday job working in a florist on my local high street. And I fell in love with flowers, and I loved everything about the kind of the shop life and, creating arrangements. And I did that for a short while, but at the time I didn't really view it as a long-term career option. And I don't know why, looking back, you wonder why you didn't. But I just am really thankful that I found my way back.
Absolutely. So bringing this conversation to the present, could you tell us a little bit about your business today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a studio florist, which essentially means that I work from home. I don't have a shop or a high street presence. Mm-hmm. So, but I provide all of the services that you would expect if you were to walk into your local high street florist. So I deliver bouquets and arrangements locally, and I work with brides on lots of weddings, creating flowers for weddings and events. But all from the comfort of home. And quite literally, my table is my kitchen table at the moment, and I work in my garden a lot, and that's
very cool. And what does your sort of typical day look like, Maria?
Well, I think the beauty of working for yourself is it can fit around everything else that's going on. So I have 3 young children, mm-hmm. and so it's very much school drops and nursery drops first, and then I tend to spend the first part of the week working on admin, kind of the admin side of things. So working on proposals for weddings, or ordering flowers for particular gift bouquets, or deliveries that I have planned for the weekend, or indeed if it's a wedding coming up, they tend to be on the weekend. So lots of planning in the early part of the week, and then the second part of the week tends to be much more hands-on. So I would get up and typically do a market run. So previously to lockdown, that was New Covent Garden Flower Market. I would kind of leave the house at about 5 a.m. on a Thursday or a Friday, and head up there to either collect or pick my flowers, and then come home, condition them, and kind of leave them to settle for a day or so, and then make up whatever it is I need to be making up towards the end of the week.
That's really interesting. And I've heard before from other florists about the very early morning runs to New Covent Garden Market. And it sounds like the market banter over there is pretty good as well, not just the flowers.
It's really a remarkable place to be. And actually, I think I've been in training for a few years now with the children, so the early mornings don't bother me as much.
Absolutely.
It's quite nice to get up and escape and leave my husband to do the school run and make the packed lunches and things. So
that's it, absolutely. And Maria, from my point of view, and I'm sure our listeners will second this, floristry is such a visually impactful sort of profession and art form, if you will. I wonder, where do you as a professional studio florist get your inspiration from?
The seasons, hugely. And I think if you scroll through my Instagram page, or like I did the other day, you can really see the story of the seasons through the images of the flowers that I've made, because the colours, that they're the same for a while, but different styles. And then it just naturally merges into a new season, and you can really tell the journey throughout the year. But I think, again, where we live, this area, there's so much inspiration and surrounding us with river walks, and Hampton Court Palace, the gardens there are fantastic, and we spend lots of time there. And also there's been a real kind of shift with trying to work with British flowers more, as opposed to the flowers that are imported. And I've been really lucky to meet a few people locally. One lovely lady called Annie, who's based in Hampton and has a small cutting patch at home. Her business is called There May Be Bugs. And I met her quite early on after starting my business. She contacted me actually, which was so lovely. And I went and spent some time with her in her garden. And she grows throughout the year, and kind of from this time of year through to autumn, just has an amazing variety of beautiful flowers that are just grown naturally, as you would find when you are out on a walk. And that inspires me hugely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you mentioned Instagram there. And of course, social media nowadays, Maria, for any small business, has the ability to become that person's sort of shop window as such. And I wonder if you could tell us how you think about social media in your business, not only to keep in touch with existing customers, but also to raise awareness of your brand with prospective customers too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, Instagram has been pivotal in growing my business. And, I have a website, but as I say, I don't have a high street presence as such. So pretty much all of my business comes through Instagram. And it's been an interesting journey, actually, because when I first started my business, I flew in with kind of wild abandonment, and I wasn't really too aware of other florists and I guess competition as such. I just went and started doing my own thing. And after a few months, I then went through a period of becoming aware of all these amazing florists and individuals locally that were doing all sorts of fabulous things. And I kept thinking, oh my goodness, but I'm not quite as good as them. I don't have as much experience as them. And I think the key really is just to be authentic. And I've found that just focusing on my flowers and my style, I've naturally attracted clients and customers that I would potentially call, my ideal client, particularly with brides. I think everybody has their own unique style and everybody has their own tastes. And I think that, every bride out there finds a florist that's perfectly matched to them. And that is mostly done through Instagram. So yeah, it's very powerful. I feel like there's still lots that I could do to kind of improve and learn on, but there's also some fabulous accounts out there that really help with offering insight into the workings and the more technical sides of the algorithms and things like that. That all kind of blows my mind a bit. But I just think consistency in promoting, your own style and a little bit about yourself as well tends to be the key to making things work.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And that's exactly how we approach our social media presence too, is we are ourselves, we are authentic. We try to add value, and then we try to keep consistent, which is of course hard because consistency is the one key thing that we can all control, and it's the one that's easy to let sort of go for times when there's in my case a tax year end, or in your case maybe 2 weddings in a row or something. So I definitely second that the strongness of consistency is seen only when you employ it. So I'm with you there. Yeah. Maria, I just wanted to switch gears on you slightly, if I may. because of course we're now just coming out of, starting to ease out of the COVID-19 lockdowns here in the UK after about 14 months of in and out of these lockdowns. I wondered, how have these lockdowns affected your business?
Well, quite positively, to be honest. I think it's an interesting one, because I know the negative impact on the kind of wedding and events industry has been huge, and that transcends to anyone who's involved in the business of weddings, so photographers, florists, bridal shops, catering. It's been huge, but because my business is a relatively small one and fairly in its infancy, the focus and the shift towards supporting local businesses and shopping locally has really helped. And I started fairly early on in the first lockdown delivering flowers locally, which I hadn't really done before. It had been much more of a focus on the wedding and event side of things, and workshops as well I'd run. But I decided to start delivering locally because obviously the florist shops on the high street were closed. And things just really moved quite quickly. And, before I knew it, there were lots and lots of Friday doorstep deliveries, and it was really lovely. It was also a bit of a juggle, because when the schools were closed, the children were home, but at the same time, for me, flowers is kind of like therapy. So it was quite nice to have something else to focus on. And I think the gift and the sentiment of giving flowers, particularly at a time that's difficult for lots of people, it was a really lovely thing to do. And the awareness of my home studio has grown through that, which has been really lovely.
That's really interesting, and hats off to you for that as well, because I've just been super impressed with the guests that I've had on the show now over definitely these last 12 to 14 months, and how different businesses have just got creative. It's the old, when the going got tough, the tough got going, and they just started thinking outside the box, getting inspiration from businesses in different sectors to theirs, but then going, oh, hang on a second, there's something here that I could translate into my own field. And that whole flavor of doubling down on being local is a thread that has run across those conversations. So I'm really, really glad to hear that, Maria. And you mentioned now a couple of times the word wedding. And I wonder if I could pick your brains on behalf of some of our listeners who I know have had to put sort of big wedding plans on pause because of the lockdowns. And with particular regards to sort of the florist that they engage with, the flower arrangements, what tips and advice would you give a couple or a bride, which would hopefully help them with that part of their wedding planning?
Well, it's so interesting. And I'm speaking to a bride at the moment, actually, whose wedding was postponed, I think 3 times.
Oh, gosh.
And initially, her and her fiance had hoped to get married in the summer, and she had in her head very much visions of a summer meadow kind of style. But speaking to her, I kind of explained that, the difference in the seasons and the type of flowers don't necessarily have to alter what you originally had in mind. I think there's so much that can be done. I think the key is really to find somebody that you're comfortable working with. So I think if you can have open conversations, about what your ideal is, but then are willing to take suggestions and make slight alterations, not in the style that you have in mind, but on the type of flower, quite simply, then, I'm always of the mindset that anything is possible, almost. And within reason, I think. And one of the kind of key stages for me when I'm working with couples is the kind of the mood board, and spending real time on getting to know everything about that couple, their likes, events, where they shop, all sorts of things to build a picture of the couple. And but to be honest, I think the beauty of seasonality is that there are so many wonderful flowers at different times of year. And the bride I'm working with, as I mentioned, has gone from a summer to an autumn wedding, but we've kind of got there, and she's super excited about that now. So I think it's just, finding somebody that you're comfortable working with and happy to chat through, not just once, but perhaps a few times to make sure you get things right.
Yeah. And again, this is part of that insight piece, Maria, that I mentioned at the top of the show, which is, when you think about it the way you described it there, that personal relationship between the bride or the couple and their florist is key, because God forbid of any other lockdowns, that's not even what I mean, but because of any other sort of ups and downs that might happen. And having that relationship allows them to adapt in a way that, the florist can deliver on, but of course that the couple are happy with, and it still fulfills their vision for their big day. So I really appreciate you sharing that insight into how people might want to think about this part of their wedding planning. Maria, what are some of the key business lessons you've learned throughout your life?
Well, I think certainly from my previous career within marketing, I worked in kind of lots of corporate environments, and the one thing that transcends, I think, from there to pretty much everyday life is communication is totally key. And again, kind of going back to working with brides and events, I think just open conversations about what's possible, what's not is always key. I think the authenticity around yourself and your business, it's good to be unique and not see things as competition, just to kind of be yourself, I think is always quite important. So yeah,
I definitely second that. Authenticity is absolutely key. We can't be everything to everyone, can we? And in fact, the more that we're ourselves, the more we'll attract people that want to engage with somebody like ourselves, whatever ourselves actually is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually the other point is probably just, I think when you're addressing like a career change, which I've done, it's, there were lots of, my decision to go with a career change was a lot to do with my stage in life and my family, but also I had always had a yearning to kind of return to floristry because it has always been a passion of mine. But when you're weighing things up, it's not necessarily an easy decision to make. But I think the old sentiment of just, what have you got to lose? Just go for it, be bold. Just it really does pay off. And I think I have seen that firsthand from my husband. He worked in the city for many, many years in banking, and then quite a few years ago now made a career change and set up his own company doing something completely different. And I'm yet to kind of come across somebody that's regretted making a big change like that. I think if you've got it in you, or if you've got a hankering for doing something different, then yeah, if you can, you should go for it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you say that, Maria, because in our firm, we deal pretty much exclusively, well, what one would traditionally call retirement planning within the sort of financial planning and wealth management space. But retirement planning definitely over these last 12 months have been a lot more conversations from folks in their mid 40s, early 50s, wanting to know whether they've got enough to start another chapter of their lives. It isn't to stop work completely. So I very much second what you've just said there, and it's something folks should maybe take some time to pause and think about, because it's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maria, when you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
I think it probably would be making the change, later on in my career. I've loved every part of my career, to be honest with you, and I feel very lucky to, I worked in London for a long, long time, and I absolutely loved it, and I got to travel and it's taught me a huge amount, particularly in the corporate setting. And there's lots that I kind of take with me. But I think the fact that I have now moved to something that I am very passionate about, and that I love, I think is probably what I am proudest of, because the easier option probably for me would have been to do some marketing consultancy, or return perhaps part-time to a similar role. But I'm definitely pleased that I've made the move, and I'm trying to go it alone with my own business.
Absolutely. And what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
It really, the fact that the weddings are just starting to come back, I really want to kind of focus on that side of things and grow that side of my business a bit more. I love workshops. I was quite lucky in between lockdowns, just before Christmas. I ran quite a few workshops in the build up to Christmas, and I really enjoy that. I get great pleasure out of teaching people, the techniques and how to create their own designs. So more of that, to be honest. I'd love to run more workshops. And just to keep on growing, really. My business is quite small, and as I said, I'm home based. But for me, potentially a studio somewhere locally, a space where I could grow things a little bit more would be great.
Exciting times ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Maria, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
Again, I think because of where we live, we lots of walking with the children, and we live very, very close to the river, which is lovely. So lots of walking, lots of time at Hampton Court Palace. We're members there. So it's just such an easy one to do with the children, and they love the magic gardens there. It's just, we can lose hours in there. So just spending time outside, to be honest. I think everything's better outdoors, particularly with children. So, it would be time outdoors.
Absolutely. And are there any books that you've recently read that you would recommend to our listeners?
I would recommend, one to people who are particularly interested in flowers. I've got a book at the moment that's recently out, and it's called The Healing Power of Flowers. And it's full of lots of lovely images and content about the kind of holistic and healing properties of flowers and the meaning behind different varieties. And it's just really lovely for anybody who does have an interest in the power of flowers. But it also talks about how to care for your flowers and how to pull together bouquets at home or little arrangements at home. So it's a really, really lovely book for anybody who's interested.
And are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I'm a MasterChef addict, and so I'm just waiting for the final of that. But also, just trying to think, my husband and I watch an American series called This Is Us, which has been going for quite a while now. And it's just a kind of family drama, I guess, but it's quite emotive. And I very rarely get through an episode without crying. But it's really lovely about family life. And it's just kind of one to take you away, I think, to a nice place at the end of the day.
And that particular series has now been mentioned on the show, I think 4 or 5 times. And you know what? My wife mentioned it to me the other day because a couple of her friends were talking about it too. So I think that is probably going to find its way on the top of my to-watch list soon. And we'll just be going through the many different series that are already out there, let alone the episodes still to come. So no, thanks for sharing that. And finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
So mostly the most kind of current content would be my Instagram account, I guess, which is My Table Floral Design. But I also have a website, which is www.my-table.co.uk.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add these links to the show notes. Maria, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Thanks so much for asking.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.